Okay, this short little video covers the last section of Chapter 7, and that has to do with correcting entries. As I've mentioned in the past, when you make an error or you have an error and you catch it right away, there's an easy way to fix it, and that is to just simply, maybe you wrote 534 and it should have been 543. Just simply draw a line straight through it and write the correct amount above, or write it where it's supposed to be. However, there are some instances when you don't catch it right away. And in some of those instances, we have to actually create a new journal entry in order to fix it. You can't just simply draw a single line through it and fix it. If you take a look at my handy dandy illustration, remember I'm not an art teacher, here we have our journal. We journalized our transactions. And the next step is to post them to the general ledger, each of the transactions. You have to decide what has happened at the time you discovered the error. If you find that you discovered the error, if you find that everything is correct in the journal, but when you posted it to the ledger, you made an error somewhere in the ledger. It's incorrect over there. You do not need a correcting entry. You can just simply draw a straight line through it and fix it. If, however, you find an error over in the journal, and before you figured out that there was an error, you posted that same error over to the general ledger, so we have an error and it's incorrect in two different places, that's when we're going to have to create a new journal entry to fix it. If it's incorrect in the journal and we find it in the journal before we post it, it hasn't been posted yet, you can simply use the straight line and fix it that way, so you don't need a journal entry. We're going to focus our attention on this error right here, where we made a mistake over here, and then we brought that same mistake over to our general ledger. We have to fix it using a journal entry because other transactions have happened and it's caused kind of some chaos in our accounts. You will not have to actually create correcting entries. What you will need to know is when it is necessary to create a correcting entry and when it's not necessary. So you're going to want to know this chart here, when we have to create one and when we don't have to create one. But just so you have an idea as to what that correcting entry looks like, I'm going to be working through problem 7-9. Not all of it, just a couple of the transactions to give you a feel for it. On page, of course I didn't jump ahead like I was supposed to. Oops, I'm having a mess. On page 190 of your textbook, in problem 7-9, it says an auditor, that's somebody who comes in and reviews the books, an auditor reviewed the accounting records of Showbiz Video. The auditor wrote a list of transactions outlined below, describing, I'm going to put this over here, describing the errors discovered in the March records. The general journal for March and a portion of the general ledger are included in your working papers. So the auditor came through and he or she found 7 different errors. We're going to go through a couple of them and we're going to determine whether or not we need a correcting entry, and then if we do need a correcting entry, how would we write that? So the first one that happened on March 3rd. A $125 purchase was for office supplies. Let's take a look at our journal and notice that it said office furniture for $125 instead of office supplies. Now, if I look over here in office furniture on my next page, I see that I did indeed post it to the office furniture and not to office supplies. Since I have an error in the journal and in the ledger, I'm going to have to create a correcting entry. Now this is how I like to think through it. I always, pardon my scrap paper here, I always think in terms of what should have happened. Well, if I have cash and office supplies, if it had been done correctly, I would have subtracted, how much was it? I forgot. $125 from cash and added $125 on the debit side to office supplies. But that's not what happened. Instead, I subtracted $125 from cash. That was correct. But I added the $125 to office furniture. Since this is correct, since the cash is correct, I'm not going to do anything to cash. Rather, I'm going to think through, how can I fix this mess? Well, I should not have posted $125 to office supplies. In order to get rid of it, I'm going to have to actually have a transaction that puts $125 on the credit side. And when that happens, I'll then be left with my zero balance, or it will have not made a change in office supplies. Oh, forgive me, little mind fart here. This is what I did do. Sorry, office supplies. I should have done $125 and I didn't. I should not have done $125 in office furniture and I did. So to get rid of this $125 in office furniture, I'm going to record a transaction that puts $125 on the credit side of office furniture. That'll cancel that out. And then we didn't originally put $125 in office supplies, so I'm going to record a debit of $125 in office supplies. So using these two account names and these two amounts, I'm going to record a correcting entry. I would simply go to the next page of my journal. This happens to be 21, so I'm going to make this page 22. Start for the year. We found the error on March 31st, and I'm going to start with my account that should have been debited. Office supplies, $125. And then I'm going to credit office furniture. For $125. I know that needs to be done because of the memo that the auditor sent me, and the memo was memo number 15, so I'm going to put here underneath memo, not 15, 50. Now the one thing that I'm missing up here is the words correcting entries. Because they're strange entries, they don't have to do with actual transactions, but rather corrections, I need to label it as correcting entries. I'm going to look at one more error and see if we need to have a correcting entry. The second error said, a $200 payment to a creditor, Broad Street Office Supply, was not posted to the account. So I'm going to look at March 7th in my journal. Here's this one. And it looks like we journalized it correctly. Accounts payable, Broad Street Office Supply, we brought down our debt by $200 and we made a payment of $200. That's correct. If we go back to this over here, if our journal is correct, we're going to check to see if the ledger is incorrect. Let's take a look at accounts payable. Accounts payable, Broad Street. There is no transaction from March 7th. The other account was cash in bank. Let's take a look at cash in bank. Yep, we did post the cash in bank. So the only thing that we have to fix is we have to post accounts payable Broad Street office supply for the $200 that we forgot to post it for. And we just do it on the very day that it should have been posted. This is coming from General Journal 22. It was $200, which means we now only owe $2,000. And then I would come back over here and make sure that I actually have that 201 in there. So in this second situation, we did not have to create a correcting entry. Rather, we just made the change that was necessary. Let's go to our correcting entries though. Since we put an entry in here, we actually have to post them. So I'm going to go to office supplies here. And on office supplies, I'm going to write March 3rd, and this time I'm going to write correcting entries because it is an odd little entry. And we're going to say that it comes from G22 right up here. We're going to write 125 on the debit side, which is what we should have posted over there to begin with. And when I take my 120 plus my 125, I'm left with 245 in office supplies. That's where it's supposed to be now. And then I would come back over here and write 120. Office furniture is the next one. It was credited. I would once again write the 30, oops, excuse me, this should be the 31st because that's when they caught the error. On the 31st, once again, I have a correcting entry. I'm going to abbreviate that a little bit. It happened, or we have it on page 22, and we have a credit of $125. When we bring down our office furniture by $125, we're left with $2,000 in office furniture, and that's what it should have been prior to this extra debit that we didn't need. This was just an illustration of how you might do a correcting entry. Once again, you don't have to do anything. You just need to be responsible for knowing when a correcting entry is needed. If it's correct in the journal and incorrect in the ledger, just fix it in the ledger and don't use a correcting entry. If it's incorrect in the journal and then it's incorrect in the ledger as well, you do need a correcting entry. And then finally, if it's incorrect in the journal, but we haven't posted it yet, just fix it in the journal and you don't need a correcting entry. In your review for the test, we'll be going through a number of different scenarios that will help reinforce this idea.